Hi everyone, and thank you Maria, and thank you the organizers and for having me, for the invitation. Also Claudia, and well, and thanks everyone for listening. I will, as Maria said, my expertise in my PhD was in cultural policy, so Stephen was talking about the future. I will talk about the past in the sense that together with cultural policies, I've been researching on social impact of technology for different organizations. One of them involved in Memento's project will be presented later, Trilateral. Right now I'm part of the ethics and human rights cluster addressing different types of technologies, conducting AI impact assessments, etc. So that's my other field of expertise, and that's why I think this presentation will combine some lessons learned that intersects cultural policies with the AI analysis of different systems in different domains. So I have tried to put together something around the lines of one of the main challenges, which is addressing AI integration while keeping good practices in terms of privacy and data protection. This is something that, since we've been implementing data protection impact assessments, different data management systems to protect data in cultural institutions for years, now we have some experience that is being used also to integrate new AI tools in a safe manner from that perspective, but we also are seeing different tensions, as you can see here, that I will introduce between principles that are in the GDPR and principles that come together with the AI Act. So that's how I address the main challenges or the axiological challenge of the presentation. The context, the historical context for this, we have been today addressing the evolution of technological integration in museums in different manners, but there are different ways also of addressing these periods in the literature. Some have talked about the period where photography was a key issue, also impacting actually on the aura of art pieces, impacting also on the actual understanding of the idea of representation, and that changed a lot, of course, the visitor experience, the aesthetic experience. But later, with this idea of democratizing museums and public and heritage access through technology with the digital revolution of the 90s, we remember all that we were talking about the internet as a democratization tool that was going to revolutionize the field. Of course, that can be seen as a second wave of democratization after the 70s and all the tradition of cultural democracy from the technological perspective. But now we are in a different phase, and this new phase, as I was saying, come together with the future. Okay. I will move back. Okay. Now, can you hear me? So as I was saying, the next frontier and the future trends are now, I would say, more here than in the future. So as part of these trends, I've been classifying here. You can see some of the ways we are using AI in museums that align with the actual definition of the main functionalities AI or purposes AI may have. No? So we have content management, prediction, classification. We have recommender systems, decision making based on AI, and we are actually using AI in museums for all of these functions, going from classification to preservation actually, and visitor engagement, which is key. As part of this, one particular focus has been improvement of visitor experience from the perspective of personalizing the experience even from the marketing side. And also together with that, the other branch I would say is accessibility as a core value. And I will introduce some of the impacts that we have been seeing in the accessibility value that come together with these tensions with privacy and data minimization and other aspects. So considering these usages, if we go through the literature, we will find an emphasis on them: accessibility, preservation, personalization, etc. So we can say that right now the narrative is that we are preserving cultural heritage and public collections while making them targeted and accessible to the wider audience. However, and we've been discussing different ways and social impacts of AI, one of them, of course, are exclusionary effects of different forms of bias. I will show some examples. And of course, these exclusionary effects are based on protected group attributions that are mostly connected to specific AI models. No? So, for instance, recommender systems used in museums that may be targeting disadvantaged groups in a disadvantaged manner. So that's what we can define as biased or discrimination. So, but we also have many cases where there is an increasing use of data entries, data points needed to feed specific AI models too. So that's another challenge I will focus on. Right now, today we saw that we have some analysis and good social impact assessments of this process, but if we go through some examples, such as the AI experience architecture of the Shanghai Museum, we can see that they've been working the last year on all of these layers of data integration, and many of them are associated with AI systems. So the AI experience architecture shows that we have the backend together with many tools that are related to the actual governance of the museum. Others are in the front end, are related to the actual experience of the user. And then we have, of course, for instance, in terms of capability layers, the use of platforms for assessing management, EOT control. We have several different, in each of them, and this is the important thing I wanted to simplify here, is that they require specific data entries and in some cases personal data, of course. Mark Osterman from the museum in Miami has been working on trying to classify these different usages of AI. And we can see here, this is an art museum, but again, from collections, preservation, to classification of collections, to event scheduling, chatbots, etc. So this means a lot of data entries, data that is needs to be monitored, controlled, preserved, etc. So if we widen a bit the picture, we'll go through several tensions between principles. For instance, accessibility and inclusivity that can come together with the exclusion of certain groups because of the use of recommender model, as I said before. Preservation that can affect certain components, constitutive components of the art piece related to tradition or identity values. AI personalization and bias related to echo chambers. We saw some examples before. And the issue of intellectual property, mostly related right now in the discussions of the literature with generative AI. From all of these different challenges and going through one example of gender bias, we will then focus on maintenance between privacy or data issues and an AI system. Here, Clarify, which is a very good computer vision system, was used to classify these different art pieces from this artist too close. And I don't know if you can see from there the terms that were put by the tool when classifying the different paintings. For the man, above is funny and crazy, and for the girl is pretty cute and sexy. So this is just one of the problems we can have when classifying, getting metadata from collections, etc. I was discussing before this talk with one of your colleagues about how they were using for the National Museum data classifiers, and this is, of course, something that requires a specific expertise from management of the systems to conduct the required human oversight of these outcomes. In some cases, they can affect personal data. You can take the picture. So, if we focus only on the issue of tensions between data protection and AI, we can use two main, I would say, worldwide relevant regulations, the GDPR and the AI Act, which was already presented before. And while we can expect the GDPR to be protecting personal data from museums, and this includes visitor data related to cookies in the website, names, but several other identifiers, some of them collected from computer vision systems that need a behavioral analysis, for instance. This is not that common, but we can see some examples out there. In order to protect this data, we need to consider all principles in Article 5 of the GDPR, including data security, minimization. The issue of retention of personal data in museums is quite relevant because we were not able to comply with data protection regulations before the actual implementation of the AI Act. So we have data that we are, and I say we because I feel part of the cultural sector. And then there are other rights related to AI, specifically high-risk systems used in museums that will be self-assessed as high risk in some cases, and they should by the provider before sharing the system with the museum. They require to go through a fundamental rights impact assessment that needs to be conducted by the implementer. This is the museum, because these are public institutions. So this is very important to consider, because not all systems introduced will be minimal risk or limited risk. They will be, in some cases, high-risk systems that require this expertise we've been discussing before. This is AI literacy, but I would say it's not only training for the current personnel, it's also new personnel, because, for instance, the monitoring of bias for some very high-risk sensitive system, they require technical expertise to select the correct metrics, to implement even the technical documentation provided by the provider of the system. You need to know how to go through that documentation to calculate bias for one group in your museum. That's very tricky. So maintenance is expected to be provided by the provider, but we also need to have some counterpart in our own institution to be able to ensure accuracy, bias mitigation, etc. So when we see these two combined, we have several different tensions or dilemmas. Here I'm presenting just some examples. For instance, the issue of digital accessibility versus privacy. I mentioned before, we can be enhancing accessibility through AI tools, but we also require, of course, the adoption of specific minimization. Minimization means that all data that was collected to implement the AI system with that particular purpose and is not needed anymore for that purpose need to be removed. So we need to have some sort of automated removal system or some sort of human oversight of that. AI fairness and historical bias. We saw the example of gender bias before. So how we are going to ensure that this is being monitored again, and this can be related to protected identifiers from one group, but also they can include data from one individual. If we have pseudonymized data, which is data that connected with other data can identify one person, and this person is being discriminated, it's not only a bias issue, it's also a data protection issue. So then, transparency versus black box. We have here the need, was mentioned before, of having explainable AI that is facilitated by the provider with explainable AI tools integrated into the tools, but also we need to be able to explain to the user what is going on. Data retention and accuracy, there is a trade-off there, because if we don't have enough data, the system can be impacting on again, individuals or group, because it's not accurate enough, but you also want to minimize the amount of data, so there is a tension there. Consent friction is quite important. We are talking all the time about accessibility, but we are asking consent users to use data. They don't know what's the purpose or etc. So we need to ensure accessibility to informed consent or informed consent. And then automation and human oversight that I would say cover is cross-cutting to all these issues. So examples of good practices cover, and I would say that we need to have an holistic perspective to address this, because we have good practices that cover or address specific tools. So the chatbot used by the Louvre is one of them, because they went through a data protection impact assessment. They have, if you use it qualitatively, it's even sometimes funny because you can ask it ironic questions, whatever, and work quite well. It's not being biased at least, and provides just good information. But again, if we see the data protection, the list of data entries and data protection purposes for data management provided by the actual museum, is a very long list that actually is not detailed enough at least in my opinion. But you can see that they are collecting a lot of data to be able to manage these tools. So the good practice here is anonymizing and deleting visitor data for that particular chatbot. I would like to know what's happening with their overall data protection impact assessment, which must be very good, I would say. So yeah, some closing remarks. I think I'm good with the time. Yeah, the perspective is the use of and the further integration, accelerated integration of these tools with the different purposes and others. No? We mentioned personalization, engagement, and inclusiveness, and many others. Here, the challenges are about fairness, robust governance, protecting privacy, and this needs to be by design in the sense that we will be using tools that are compliant with the GDPR, that they say they are also compliant with the Act, they provide the technical documentation, but governance from the perspective of the museum need to be prepared, and this covers AI literacy that for providers is even mandatory for high-risk systems. So we need to be careful also with our own requirements with accessing these tools. But then the monitoring that comes together with governance is about understanding contextual factors and changing environments. Sometimes we have a model that works very well with current data. Sociodemographics in the museum change and then start to discriminate. If we are really not able to monitor that system and remodel the system based on new sociodemographics, we have a problem. So how we can provide that as a museum, as a public institution? This requires a lot of resources and effort, so that's important to consider. And then as part of this monitoring is operationalizing these values by design. We will have these architectures that are supposed to be compliant, but then together with that, all the requirements, such as the fundamental rights impact assessment I mentioned before, but also others, that need to be part of the ongoing implementation. We need to monitor, conduct algorithmic impact assessments, social impact assessment, and data protection impact assessment to mitigate, not to eliminate risk. And thank you.
Thank you, Mariano. If you stand there, we can take questions more easily, because then I just have to move to people asking the questions. But I want to ask a question first. The EU has got its AI Act, which is more an act of regulation, whereas I saw that the Biden administration has prepared something they call the AI Bill of Rights. Now, our thinking seems to me very regulatory, where their thinking seems to me very much more taking a step back, even though it's not yet compulsory. And I was wondering whether the way we're doing this is just creating too much complexity and therefore isn't transparent enough, and maybe we should be thinking more about our rights vis-a-vis AI in various environments, including culture, rather than regulating the nitty-gritty of it.
Yeah. It's a good question. I would say that the regulation, the AI Act, is quite complex for providers. The weight is put, most of the weight is put there. Implementers, in this case, need to, as we've been discussing, they need to go through an adaptation concerning knowledge, I would say. That's quite, and then some technical capabilities that are come together. But they are required mostly for high-risk systems, and they also are about having a good understanding of the technical specifications that are facilitated by the provider. So it's about dialogue and the capacity. But it's true that it's a burden. It's something that comes together with the regulation. Actually, as part of the discussion, there were ideas about changing some of the requirements for high risk about AI literacy, remember, and they were putting more weight on implementers, certain types of implementers in some sectors, and that was removed. So I think, in the end, that what big companies producing AI are the ones that need to be more worried, probably. But in any case, it's true that as public institutions, as I said before, museums are required to comply, and yeah, as you said, other solutions may be out there, but I think I won't provide my opinion about the GDPR. I think it's a great regulation. No, but I mean, it comes with that. It comes with responsibilities and
obligations.
Yeah.
Anyone? Any questions about AI in museum collections?
Nice talk. I don't know if it's a museum, it's a general question. Do you think that this regulation can actually slow down technological improvements? So, because for example, Europe has like a very high regulation and so on, and if you look at China or the US, they just go wild. So do you think this can slow us down and then economically can... It's not museum, but it's just general question that I was wondering.
Yeah. The thing is that discrimination here is AI fairness actually is not a specific requirement for providers. It's indirectly mandatory in, for instance, in Article 10 is asking is about data governance. Data governance is mostly about training data used by the provider, so comply. And that means that the Commission or the regulation is saying, okay, you need to comply in the training process, so you are facilitating the system to be fair from the discrimination perspective. But actually, as part of the negotiations, there were calls for further regulating fairness as a specific, as in the German regulation, which is more like core of the regulatory framework. But I would say that, yeah, it's a burden for providers, probably, because here what you need to provide, for instance, is a long list of technical documentation showing how the system was trained, which were the metrics. Everything needs to be transparent, mostly for high-risk system and high-scale system. So yeah, it's commercially, yeah, that will have an impact, of course. But the other solution is to expect to find discrimination, to react, which is more or less, I would say, happening in other countries you mentioned. So, yeah, that's the trade-off.
Anyone? Yes?
Hi, thank you for the presentation and digging into some of these issues. I know that one of the issues facing the library field around AI at the moment is increasingly being asked to sign contracts that say that you should not allow AI training on your collections. And we're seeing some increasing pressure on this. And I know the AI Act dances around this question of, is it better to regulate inputs or outputs? I don't know if you had any particular thoughts about that, as which is the most proportionate, effective way of getting a form of AI that's actually better for humanity.
With inputs, you mean the model, the trained model, for instance, no? Yeah. Yeah. It's easier. Actually, the risk-based approach of the regulation is focusing on input. Yeah. And the output is also regulated because the fines are high if you are not complying with some of the inputs producing outputs that are not expected. So in the sense that, of course, the weight is in there, but you will find several outputs mentioned also, such as discrimination and lack of literacy for high-risk systems provided, etc. Transparency, explainable AI. So that is mirroring some impacts in the regulation. Of course, it's not just, as I said to mention, it's the input. The regulation is around the input and it's a risk-based approach. Yeah. Regulating the output put is, yeah, it's a good discussion about a legal discussion. I'm not a lawyer, you know, but yeah, I think there are other ways of approaching this, and there was years of discussion on this, so probably I'm not the best for answering the question.
Just to say something like, actually recently, because we are doing we are generating images, and they say that as they don't know the input of these big models, you cannot. So there was like an artist, AI artist. I don't know if you read this, but he lost his money because he had no right on his image. So the output, I think it's if they don't know where the input are coming from, they can say, oh, but it's free for everybody. It was like a recent case on this.
Yeah, that's a good approach because the implementability of AI systems is also hard to produce structural. You have several examples where the outcome is terrible, and they were not able to predict. I mean, the engineers, of course, and actually that's the definition of these forms of bias. I have some examples from algorithmic audits where actually there was a decision behind the AI model that end up with discrimination. For instance, you have social services of an important ministry in one country eliminating migration as a variable for assessing vulnerability in children. The social service system, very sensitive system. After the discussion between the psychologists, engineers, etc., the model didn't include migration because it's considered stigmatizing and not relevant for the weight of the model. And the outcome was that when it was assessed, it was discriminating, it was not valuing the risk for migrants in the way it should. So if you include it, you are more transparent, you can measure it, but if you don't have it, maybe it's because you didn't want to discriminate, you were not considered it was important, so it's very hard. And all this kind of thinking is something that we all need to type of. If we are managing AI systems in museums, we need to start thinking this way, like these unexpected outcomes.
Thank you, Mark.